Living on the road, waterways, or off grid in the UK. Dickie Dredd. So this is a new book which will be published pretty soon. It's actually an update of the book I wrote specifically about New Age Travellers a while ago, which was called Part 1 and 3-part series, Legal Issues. And I've expanded it to take into account pretty much all the travelling communities in the UK, so not just New Age travellers. So I hope you enjoy. Acknowledgements. I'd like to thank the following folk for helping me plan the book and for checking details. Mark Slay, Dave Stuck, Stu Shotness, Joe State, J&B, Ben Boatin, Rancid Pete, Dave Sanger, Pete Knowles and Gary Broom. And for proofreading the original edition and this update, the wonderful Mark Slay. Also, thank you to my beautiful Erica Rose, perhaps the only person with whom I've had a relationship where they do not try to change me in some way. And she said I'd better add a yet to that. Anyway, love ya. So, book, as was the original book, is dedicated to my dad, who, since I wrote the first book, has lost his life, unfortunately. Also to my wonderful sisters Mandy and Christine, who have put up with my stupid rants and taken on pretty much all of the caring roles for my parents. My mother's still going. She's not home now. So, love you all. So, I hate doing these bits, but, here we go. Talking about yourself. So, Dickie Dredd writes from a life lived at the edges of the systems he critiques. Under his academic name, Richard Leach, he built a career in physics and measurement science, publishing widely and working at the highest levels of research. Alongside that, he had spent decades immersed in traveller culture, festivals, off-grid living, and the informal economies that sustain them. The contrast is not accidental. His work sits precisely in the gap between formal knowledge and lived reality. His experience ranges from sound systems and festival circuits to practical self-sufficiency, wiring solar setups, building makeshift infrastructures, and navigating the shifting boundaries of legality and survival. These are not abstract ideas, but repeated experiments in autonomy, cooperation, and resilience. Same attention to detail that shaped his academic work now appears in how he approaches freedom, not as theory alone, but as something tested, adapted, and practiced. His writing brings together multiple strands: practical guidance for life on the road and off-grid, reflections on law and control, and personal accounts of trauma, addiction, and recovery. It is grounded, at times blunt, and often shaped by humour that reflects the realities of the communities he writes about. The aim is not to present an idealised alternative, but to show what already exists and how it functions in practice. Time spent in meditation and philosophical study alongside years of collective living, protest spaces and informal networks has influenced his perspective. These experiences appear throughout his work as a steady thread, an attempt to understand how people organise themselves outside formal structures, and what that reveals about power, dependence and freedom. Dickie's work is ultimately concerned with possibility. It suggests that alternative ways of living are not distant or theoretical, but already present in fragments, in vehicles, on land, on water, and in communities that operate just out of view. This book builds on that idea, offering both a map of the terrain and a reflection on what it takes to live within it. So, first part of the book, that's what all we're going to cover today is this introduction. So, across the UK, an increasing number of people are choosing to live differently. Rising housing costs, environmental concerns, changing patterns of work, and a growing desire for autonomy have led many to look beyond conventional ways of living. Some travel in vans, buses or trucks, turning vehicles into homes and moving between towns, countryside, coastlines. Others live on the water, adapting narrowboats, barges and other vessels into dwellings and navigating canals, rivers and coastal routes as a form of mobile or semi-mobile life. Some choose to settle more permanently on land of their own, buying small plots, establishing off-grid homesteads, or creating low-impact dwellings that sit outside conventional housing models. Still others move between temporary communities formed around festivals, seasonal work, or shared ideals. What these lifestyles have in common is a willingness to step partly outside the structures that dominate modern society: mortgages, fixed addresses, permanent employment, and rigid property systems. Whether based on roads, water, or land, they often involve reducing dependence on centralised infrastructure and reclaiming a degree of control over how life is organised. In recent years, this has often been described as off-grid living, van life, or nomadic living. Yet the underlying idea is far older than any of these modern labels. For centuries, people in the UK have lived mobile, semi-mobile, or unconventional lives, finding ways to exist alongside and somewhat outside the systems of settled society. Long before social media popularised van life and off-grid homesteading, the UK had already seen the emergence of a large and highly visible mobile culture. From the late 1970s through to the 1980s and early 1990s, thousands of people joined what became known as the New Age Traveller movement. Travelling in convoys of buses, trucks and improvised homes, they formed loose networks of communities, moving between rural land, roadside camps and a growing circuit of free festivals. For many involved, it was an experiment in alternative living, shared resources, collective decision making, and a deliberate rejection of mainstream expectations about work, property, and authority. Convoys sometimes stretched for miles, linking dozens or even hundreds of vehicles moving between seasonal gatherings, rural camps, and festival sites. These communities created their own informal economies, support networks, and cultural spaces, existing alongside and often in tension with the structures of the settled world. But the traveller movement did not emerge in isolation. The UK has long had traditions of mobility, including Romany Gypsy and Irish traveller communities, show people, seasonal agricultural workers, and others whose lives have historically been lived on the road. Alongside these traditions, there have also always been people living on waterways, from working boat families to modern residential boaters, navigating a different but parallel relationship with movement, place, and regulation. Alongside both land and water traditions, there have always been people living on marginal or unconventional land arrangements, from small holdings to informal settlements, often navigating similar tensions with planning systems and property law. The New Age travellers were part of this wider story of mobility and land use, but they were also something new, a modern countercultural response to the economic and political conditions of the late 20th century. Their visibility and the scale of the communities they formed often brought them into conflict with local authorities, police forces and national government. Laws were introduced, amended and enforced in ways that profoundly shaped what life on the road, on water and on unconventional land actually meant in practice. The legal landscape that emerged during that period continues to affect people today, whether they identify as travellers, van lifers, vehicle dwellers, boat dwellers, off-grid homesteaders, or simply people choosing a different way of living. For anyone considering mobile or off-grid living, these legal realities are unavoidable. Where can a vehicle be parked overnight? What powers do police have to move people on? What identification is required if you do not maintain a conventional address? What permissions are needed to live on land you own? How do planning laws, agricultural restrictions and development rules affect those attempting to establish off-grid dwellings? How do navigation rules, licensing systems and mooring restrictions affect those living on boats? How do vehicle regulations, licensing rules and public order laws interact with land use and residency? Questions such as these have determined the possibilities and limits of life on the road, on water or off-grid land for decades. In recent years, interest in mobile and off-grid living has grown dramatically. Rising housing costs, digital work, environmental awareness, and the search for greater personal freedom have led many people to reconsider what a home actually needs to be. Vans, buses, caravans, boats, and simple dwellings, whether mobile or fixed to land, have once again become part of a wider conversation about alternative ways of living. In this sense, the experience of the UK's travelling communities can be seen not as a historical phenomenon, but also as an early experiment in forms of living that are once again attracting attention on roads, waterways, and land. This book is intended as a practical guide to those realities. It focuses primarily on the legal framework that has shaped life on the road in the UK, but it also addresses the closely related issues faced by those living on waterways and those attempting to live off-grid on land. The rules, restrictions, and strategies that developed as people attempted to build alternative ways of living within and sometimes against the existing legal system apply across all these contexts. While many examples come from the New Age traveller movement, the issues discussed here apply far more widely to anyone living or travelling in vehicles, on boats, in temporary dwellings, or in low-impact off-grid homes. While this book refers broadly to the UK, the legal frameworks discussed are not uniform. Planning law, enforcement powers, and aspects of waterways regulation differ between England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Unless otherwise stated, examples are drawn primarily from England, where much of the relevant case law and enforcement practice has developed, but the underlying principles often apply more widely, and I will address them if there are differences. The aim is neither to romanticise nor condemn these ways of life. Mobile, water-based and land-based alternatives involve freedom and difficulty in equal measure. They offer independence from many of the constraints of settled life, but they also bring practical challenges and legal risks that are often poorly misunderstood by those encountering the idea for the first time. Understanding the legal landscape is therefore essential for anyone wishing to explore such a way of life responsibly. The chapters that follow outline the key legal issues that have shaped travelling and off-grid living in the UK. They explain how laws have been interpreted, enforced and sometimes contested by those living outside conventional systems. For readers interested in van life, vehicle dwelling, boat living, land-based off-grid living, alternative communities or the wider history of the UK's travelling cultures, this guide provides a foundation for understanding the realities behind the idea of living differently. Understanding these legal realities is therefore the first step in understanding what life on the road, on the water, and on off-grid land in the UK has meant, what it may continue to mean in practice. The original edition of this book was written specifically for people within the New Age traveller scene. At the time, the intention was simply to document knowledge that circulated informally with the community. The legal realities, practical experiences and lessons learned from decades of living on the road. However, in the years since the first edition was produced, interest in mobile and off-grid living has expanded far beyond the New Age traveller movement itself. Van lifers, vehicle dwellers, boat dwellers, off-grid homesteaders, small landowners and others exploring alternative ways of living now face many of the same practical and legal issues that other travellers have been dealing with for decades. For that reason, this revised edition has been republished with a wider audience in mind. While its roots lie firmly within the traveller tradition, the information it contains is relevant to anyone interested in living on the road, on the water, or on their own land, or outside conventional housing systems. Hope you enjoy.